So what we're supposed to do, of course, is to get rid of those 4 and bring up these 5. Now there's a few other things, tidal, wave. Okay, they're fine. They can do a little bit, but they will not be developed enough to give us any significant amount of energy. These are. You got to go with you know what you can do. You can't keep waiting for the silver bullet. There's no silver bullet, and you just got to do what you can. So we know these. They work. We know how they work. You got to bring those up. You got to bring these down. That's it. Very simple. Not easy, but very simple. Now this is the latest numbers off the IPCC and the UN Economic Commission, and it dropped nuclear even more. So nuclear is definitely the least. This is life cycle. This includes mining and enriching and everything else, because a lot of these include, in fact, almost all of these. The issue is construction. Okay, fossil fuel is about the fuel. It's all about the fuel. The construction and cost of operating a fossil fuel plant is 90% fuel. Okay, you're going to keep fueling it every day. A coal plant like we have in Centralia, which we soon will not have, takes about 100 100-ton coal cars every day. 100 100-ton coal cars every day. That's 10,000 tons of coal burned a day. Okay, that's a lot of fuel. So that's what the cost is. The cost of coal, the cost of gas, natural gas, the same thing. Natural gas is cheap, but it's not that cheap. So natural gas never runs all the time. You don't, because it's costly to fuel it all the time. I'm sorry. Yeah, co-firing. Sorry. Co-firing is you use biomass and you use coal or gas together. And you use the excess heat to burn stuff. So coal firing and, oh God, what's the natural gas plants coupled. Anyway, there are ways to couple different technologies together to make it more efficient. It's a little bit better, but it's not great. Now, it turns out, according to the UN Economic Commission that just completed this study, nuclear also has the least impact on everything, on eutrophication, on health, on carcinogenic effects, which is not intuitive, but if you know this, yes it is, consumption of minerals and metals, things like that. So it is the least impactive. So if you do we don't have the luxury of saying we don't like something. Well, I don't like I don't like nuclear, I don't like wind, or I don't like solar. Sorry, we don't have that luxury anymore. You got to bring them all up. If you don't bring them all up, you're going to fail. That's just the way it is. We need them all because fossil fuel produces so much energy. So if you look at Jim Hansen, you know Jim Hansen, right? You know that name? Oh my God, I am old. So Jim Hansen's the guru of climate change. Okay, he's the guy at the United States Geological Survey who was studying this, and in the 80s addressed Congress and said, climate change, global warming, bad, you got to do something about this. And everyone gave lip service to it for years. He actually was the reason why Al Gore wrote An Inconvenient Truth. So Jim Hansen is it. He's a great guy. I work with him. Really good. Kerry Emanuel. So these are all the top climate scientists in the world, all the way down, say, can't do this without nuclear. Just can't. We've done the math. We know what is possible, what's not possible, cannot do it without nuclear. So when you talk to someone who doesn't like nuclear, okay, then we're not going to solve this problem at all. I mean, we're not even going to address it. So because you don't like something. Okay, that's great. If that's how you want to run the world, there are consequences to that. So with that in mind, sorry, this is another question. It isn't a trillion or China. What are the fastest growing energy sources in the world? Just shout out. Oh my God, you guys know your crap. All right, yeah, well, it's actually oil, but yeah, it's the 3 biggest of the 3 fossil fuels. This is not what we're supposed to be doing, okay? And you can see, yeah, renewables are coming up, but that's why you can't say, I don't like something, because you need to bring all of these up if you're going to have any any possibility of making a dent in the fossil fuel. I mean, this is huge. Those ratios are ridiculous. That's why the world is 87% fossil fuel for primary energy when you include electric power with transportation. 87% fossil fuel. That's almost 100%. All right, so to get rid of that, to change these ratios, is a Herculean lift. I mean, this is a big deal. You can't be wishy-washy about this. You can't say, well, I don't like this, I don't like this. You know, and you've got to do it right. Now, there's a right way to do this and a lot of wrong ways to do this, and we'll talk about what are the wrong ways. So, what you should know about the grid, if you know anything about the grid, is that electricity is simultaneously produced, delivered, and consumed in the same minute. It has to be balanced, minute by minute. All right? If you produce more than you consume, you start blowing transformers and starting fires. If you consume more than you produce, you start having blackouts. So just talk to California and Texas about these two things. Now, this is called a load graph, so I'll show a few of these. And you can get these every day from Bonneville Power Association or CAISO or anyone else. So the red line, I don't know, is anyone here colorblind? Okay, so the red line, which is the second from the top, okay, and it's just, you know, the double hump camel, that's the load. That's what we are drawing off of the grid as a society. And and this is for 7 days. So, you know, everyone gets up in the morning, starts firing up their coffee, starts driving to work and all that kind of stuff, and the load goes up. Then during lunch it goes down, goes back up again, and at night it comes way down. Okay, so it repeats in some form every day. Saturdays and Sundays a little less load than the weekday. The blue line on top, which mirrors the load, is hydroelectric, because this is for the Pacific Northwest. This is the Pacific Northwest. So the hydro just mimics it. It mirrors it. It's load following. We use hydro to load follow, all right? The load, to balance the load. The central brown line, which is pretty constant, is thermal. And thermal means coal, gas, or nuclear, because you're heating water to steam to drive a turbine. That's what's called thermal. So, and that doesn't vary very, very much. Now, when you see the lower line, the green line, is wind. So nothing, boom. The big wind front comes through and all the wind turbines start producing, and wow, what are you going to do? Well, you've got to dump something quickly. So we dump hydro. We just dump the water over the top of the dam, which is very bad for fish, and we just lose that energy. Because our dams are called run-of-the-river dams. They are not storage dams. Only Grand Coulee is a storage dam. Okay, so we can't store this energy. We have to dump it. So all wind does in the Pacific Northwest is displace hydro. That's all wind ever does, is displace hydro. So you're not displacing fossil fuel. So you're not affecting our carbon emissions by having wind in the Pacific Northwest, because we don't have storage. You need grid storage in order to make wind effective. You got that? We need that. But we keep voting that down. And we'll talk about that. Now, capacity, I'm sorry, I'm throwing a bunch of stuff at you guys. Is this okay? Yes. Yeah. I mean, I hate to say this. What? Isn't that worse for fish? Yes, because when you dump water over the top of the dams, you dissolve nitrogen into the water below. It's very bad for fry, especially for young salmon, and for most fish of any sort.
Why can't we load follow with fossil fuels?
Sorry, with fossil fuels?
Why can't we load follow with fossil fuels instead?
Well, we don't really have enough, and coal, you know, we have some gas, and we have one coal plant that's soon to close, and so it's not cost effective to drop those down and up. In nuclear, the SMRs are made, the small modular reactors that I'll talk about are made to load follow wind. They're just perfect for it. But the big nuke plants generally don't, because they just put out energy all the time. And you can depend on that. So we just use hydro because we do. Now in Texas and in California, they use natural gas to load follow. So when they're load following, and suddenly, you know, in California it's solar, they have a huge amount of solar. So when the sun goes down, they have a bunch of gas plants, a lot of gas plants, just idling all day long, which of course you got to pay for. Okay, so when the sun goes down, they have to fire up like crazy to take advantage of that. So again, how you do this matters. Okay, you just can't just throw up a bunch of wind, a bunch of solar anywhere, and you know, to get the subsidies, of course, and then expect that's actually going to do anything for you. You need to integrate it into the entire energy mix, not just over one state, but over the entire region. And we don't do that. Okay, we're just looking for subsidies, which is too bad. Right.
Sure. So you mentioned there's only one storage dam.
Right.
Is there technology to convert other dams to storage dams?
No, see, the thing is, you can't really stop the flow of the Columbia River. It's too important for many things. Fish being one thing, transportation, irrigation, flood control. I mean, you really can't adjust the water behind the dams very much at all. Okay, or you mess up the whole system. Okay, now if you have a drought, now you're in trouble because now you don't have enough water, both to keep the temperature of the water cool enough for most of the fish up here, but also you now are suddenly not able to generate as much power during a drought. So there's so now I'll get to why this is a problem. Now, capacity factor is kind of bizarre. When you build a 100 megawatt wind farm, okay, that's called the capacity. Okay, it means that when the wind is blowing between 35 and 40 miles an hour, you're getting 100 megawatts out of that wind farm, right? When the wind drops off, though, you're not. Or if it goes higher than that, they shut down for safety reasons, okay? So the capacity factor is simply the number, the average, over which that unit is producing what it's supposed to produce. So in terms of the 7,100 megawatts of wind we have here, the wind actually is worse than that. Okay, the capacity factor is the annual percent of the maximum output possible. Okay, now in Washington State, wind turbines only produce about 27% of the time. Okay, it's not very good. In Tornado Alley, it's called Tornado Alley for a reason. Even birds don't like to migrate through Tornado Alley because the wind is blowing all the time. So the capacity factor of the same wind turbines produces a lot more energy. So again, this is important to put these units in areas where they produce the most energy so you get the biggest bang for the buck, the biggest bang for the tons of steel you're using. So you need to maximize this. You just can't put them in Washington State because you're getting a subsidy, which is the only reason why they're in Washington State. So it matters. It matters where you put this. So again, nuclear runs pretty much all the time. You only have to refuel once every 2 years. Natural gas only about 60% of the time because it is too expensive to run it more than that. Okay, everyone says how cheap gas is, but it is not unless you run it the optimal amount of time. Coal only about 50% of the time because you're refueling all the time. Hydropower, we only get about 40% of what it's supposed to produce because the water is used for so many things. It's used for fish, it's used for transportation, it's used for flood control, it's used for irrigation, it's used for recreation. All that water just used to produce power, all right? So we only use it about 40% of the time for power, and then wind and solar. So if you want to find out what a unit is going to produce per year, you take the installed capacity, 100 megawatts of wind or something, times the capacity factor, times 8766 hours in a year, and that's how much power you're going to produce. No more, no less. I mean, this is what, unless if something really goes bad, but this is what you're going to produce. Now, if you compare, if you compare a 1,000 megawatt nuclear power plant like we have out here, and 1,000 megawatts of wind, install, the same amount of install capacity. You do this calculation. Well, every year, the nuclear plant out near where I live produces 8 million megawatt hours a year. And the same install capacity for wind only produces about 2. All right. Okay, so you're going to build 4 times as many. Okay, we know that. But it's worse than that because the lifespan are completely different. So the nuclear power plants, design life is 80 years, not 40. You already hear people talk about 40 years. That was just a number picked out of the air by the Atomic Energy Commission in 1957 about when you should relicense, when you should look at this unit as though it's see what's going on. That's okay, that's fine. But the design life is 80 years. And so you produce about 650 million megawatt hours over its life. The same installed capacity for wind produces about 1/10 of that. So if you're going to compare apples to apples, you need to do this calculation for everything. So you need to build 10 times as much wind capacity to equal 1 nuclear power plant, right? That's just the way it is. And we know that. We're used to that. So if you're going to achieve any kind of a Green New Deal or low carbon future that has any hope of meeting the emission goals we care about, you're going to have some form of this. Not exactly, not exactly. You can increase, decrease, whatever you want, but you're going to have to stop building new fossil fuel plants, okay? You're going to stop, all right? Because once you build a new gas plant, you are locked into gas for 40 years. 40 years. No one shuts down 10-year-old gas plants, okay? Because first of all, they'd sue and they'd win, of course. And you're locked into the design life of that unit. So stop building fossil fuel plants. Stop closing existing hydro and nuclear that are deemed safe by the regulatory agents. That's why we have regulatory agencies, all right? That's why we have EPA and NRC and FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which monitors dams. They actually look at the concrete. They shut down Priest Rapids Dam out near me a few years ago because they had a crack in the concrete. Hey, sorry, you got to fix that. We're not going to let you keep running. Many other countries don't do that. They wait till the dam fails and wipes out whole villages downstream, and that has happened many times and continues to happen. So stop closing those. We don't have the luxury of closing perfectly good, safe working units and then think you're going to actually displace sufficient fossil fuel to do anything. You can't. And then build as many wind turbines as possible, but site them in Tornado Alley. Sorry, it matters, okay, where you put these. So here's Tornado Alley. So you're supposed to be building the stuff in the red and the orange, not in the green, okay? Wind turbines in Georgia, dumb, just dumb, okay? You don't do that because they don't get you any energy. So you got to put them in Tornado Alley. And then you can use high voltage transmission lines. We do that all the time to move it out to where it needs to be. The same thing with solar. Whoops, I'm sorry. And the reason that is because this is the amount of material needed, normalized to an output. So if you say the amount of concrete and steel, concrete is the x-axis, steel is in millions of metric tons, and is the vertical axis. So the amount of concrete and steel needed for each of these sources to produce the same amount of energy, right? This is a big difference here, right? That's why nuclear and gas just don't take anything. Gas, because it really literally doesn't take anything to build a gas plant. You can throw it up in a year. Nuclear just runs so long, so you don't need to keep redoing it every 20 or 30 years. So, and of course, wind takes the most steel and the most concrete. Hydro takes a lot of concrete, but not much steel. Solar takes both. Even coal takes much more. So if you're going to put that much steel and concrete on the ground, you better get the most energy from it that you can and not displace something like hydro. I mean, that's... Okay, and then on the bottom there, rooftop solar. All new buildings should have rooftop solar, because rooftop solar, you can amortize that in with the mortgage and you won't even feel it. Your monthly payments, you won't even feel it, okay? To retrofit a house like I did, my house, is very costly and very difficult, and it doesn't really make much sense. But every new building should have rooftop solar. And again, first in places that have at least 200 sunny days a year, not Maine. Okay, so again, you want to put it where it's red, or at least orange. I mean, yeah, you can get away with yellow, but you know, my solar panels don't make much here. You know, they're 10% capacity factor. Now, if you can follow the sun like the big, you know, the big solar farms do, you can get that up to 20-25%. But you know, you want to put it down in Arizona and New Mexico where you can get 35%, 40%. Of course, right? Is this a difficult concept? No, it's not. Okay, so now small modular reactors, they're designed to load follow wind and solar. I mean, they were designed right from the beginning. And the nice thing, we have not been idle in the last 30 years. These designs are pretty good. And again, China just brought on 2 of those online. They can't melt down. I mean, I can't believe it took us this long to figure out that size matters. Okay, when you shrink the core, the surface area to volume ratio changes enough that you cannot melt down. You can bleed off heat faster than it can build up. Kind of simple. Don't know why it took us this long. Well, it didn't take it this long because our nuclear navy does exactly this. Okay, the nuclear navy is the original small modular reactors. And so every submarine we have is nuclear powered, and every aircraft carrier we have is nuclear powered. And they're 1 or 2 modular systems sitting right next to each other. And we have had millions of people nuclear navy personnel work on these. Never been a problem. Never been a problem. Russia had some problems. Why should I be surprised? So there are 3 designs that are probably going to be built in Washington State, but certainly various places. X-Energy's X100 is a modular pebble bed reactor. It's going to be built out near where I live. Probably come on board about 2030. TerraPower, this is Bill Gates' company. You know Bill Gates has a nuclear company? You know that, right? Yeah, it's really cool. I love them. They're great people. I go visit them all the time. About 15 years ago, he talked to the foundation and said, you know, we're not doing anything in energy. Why don't you do some research and figure out what we should do? And they came back and they said, nuclear, no question. So he pulled $50 million out of his back pocket, actually, not the foundation, out of his back pocket, and told them to hire, you know, the 40 best nuclear scientists they could find. And they did, and it's brilliant. Now that one is going to go into Wyoming. It's going to go in the same site as a coal plant that's retired, because it can take the advantage of the existing infrastructure, the high voltage transmission lines, even the turbines. I mean, all you're doing is, in coal, gas, and nuclear, is heating water to steam to turn a turbine. I mean, that's all you're doing, okay? Now, NuScale out of Oregon, out of Corvallis, brilliant. It's just a shrunk down light water reactor. It's great. Jose Rios is brilliant, so this is their design, and that's it. And most of these are also below grade. So again, you get another heat sink. So you just can't melt these things down. Oh, so if you lose power, you lose water, everything goes awry. All it does is just cool off, and that's it. Cannot melt down. Now, the National Hydropower Association and the Department of Energy have a plan, and this is the lowest hanging fruit in America, to double hydro without building a single new dam. And to do that, it turns out only 3% of our dams are electrified. 97% of the dams that exist don't produce power. Yeah, so you could do that easily without building a new dam, just, you know, powering it, uprating it. And these are the ones that are best for that. And the nice thing is, see the ones that are near Tornado Alley, because you need those to buffer the wind in Tornado Alley. So again, we can double hydro energy in America without building a single new dam. Very easy. It is the lowest hanging fruit. In Washington State, we have 1,100 dams, and only 38 of them are electrified, and we are the highest average of anyone. So, again, secure sources of metals. We need these metals. We do not have enough lithium, cobalt, iron, or steel even. And we need to do that. You cannot come up with a green energy revolution without these materials. Just forget it. Copper turns out to be probably the most rate-limiting step, is copper. You need to build, for the United States, 300 million fully electric vehicles by 2040. That is a big lift. Okay, but you're not going to. Did I not turn off my phone? I'm sorry. That is. I'll call you back. Sorry. You are not going to replace petroleum without replacing most of the internal combustion engines. Now, there's 300 million we need in the United States. The world, we need 3 billion. All right, and that's going to be tough. We need to streamline the process of approving high voltage transmission lines and nuclear and hydro and pumped hydro storage and whatever else. We can't take 10 years to license something. We don't have the time. And we need grid storage backup. Okay, now, what about storage? All right, so grid scale batteries, we're not going to do it. We don't have the materials. Now, we have some things in the works, but things that are in the works are at least 10 years from actually being in the field, so we don't have that. What we do have is gravitational potential energy. Pumped hydro storage, have you heard of that? Pumped hydro storage, good segue. So, pumped hydro storage is you build two reservoirs, one about 300 feet above the lower one, and when you have excess wind and solar, which is whenever they're producing, you pump water up into the upper reservoir. When you're done, when you need that energy, you let it out and it drives a hydroelectric plant just like a hydroelectric dam. It is brilliant. 97% of the grid energy storage in the world is pumped hydro. Right? Now, it's brilliant, doesn't take much space. The evaporation rate is actually quite small. But every time we propose one in Washington State along the Columbia River, everyone shoots it down. The tribes, everyone. It's like, what are you shooting this down? This is nothing. The environmental impact here is nothing compared to everything else you could do. But yeah, so we're not doing this. Now, it turns out, this is done all over the place. This is a German one built in 1958, and it's still running. They just run. They don't take any maintenance. Occasionally you have to fix something, but it's pretty easy. And so this one is load following a wind farm of about the same size. Okay, this is really easy. It's very nice. Now, what if you don't have water? What if you're in a desert? Well, okay, there's something called the energy vault, which again, instead of lifting water up 300 feet, it lifts 35-ton bricks up 300 feet using excess wind and solar. So when you need that energy, you just let these bricks drop, and they actually drive a generator. It's brilliant. Don't need water, very, very cheap, very low maintenance. And the bricks are green. They're not even concrete. They're actually green materials with green polymers. It's really kind of neat. One area, they use shredded wind turbines blades that they stick together and make into these bricks. Kind of cool. All right, so what we have to do in America is go from this mix. This is our present mix. Go from this mix to this mix. Okay, it's simple, but not easy. All right, simple but not easy. I still have some gas there because we keep building gas plants and we're stuck with them for 40 years. All right, now, in the United States, it's going to take 1 billion tons of steel. How much steel do we produce here? About 160 million tons a year. Globally, we're going to need about 10 billion tons of steel, but we only produce about 1 billion tons of steel globally. So we're going to have to adjust this. We're going to have to deal with this. You just can't snap your fingers and say we're going to build all this stuff. Where are you going to get the steel? You're going to have to quadruple the amount of steel mines in the world. That's going to go over big. Okay, so in America, this low carbon mix, some form, don't get me on this, doesn't have to be exact, but some form of this, about 500,000 new megawatts of wind, 200,000 new megawatts of nuclear. Now this includes backup, pump hydro storage, 300,000 new megawatts of solar, 120 new megawatts of hydro. Don't even have to build a single new dam. And this will cost about $9 trillion, of which capital is $4 trillion. Now that sounds like a lot of money? It is not, actually. It is exactly what we spend now for the same amount of power. If you do business as usual, it's going to cost you $9 trillion, but only $1.7 trillion in capital, because the rest is going to go to buying fuel, fossil fuel. Right? So business as usual, most of the money goes to buying fossil fuel because we're dominated by fossil fuel. So this way, you're spending the same amount of money, but now you're actually building things out of steel and concrete, not buying gas and coal to go up the stacks. Right? So it doesn't cost any more, but when you have this much capital, you're telling the public, you got to pay up front for savings later. Who likes that? No one likes that. Okay, so trust us. Give us $9 billion and trillion, and you'll save later. Okay, so this is the problem. No one wants to invest up front, but you have to invest up front. This is called infrastructure. Infrastructure. That's why we became the greatest nation on earth, because we actually built infrastructure from 1940 to 1980. Huge amounts of infrastructure. And then we kind of settled on our laurels and have not done a lot of upkeep. And of course, China is spending trillions of dollars on infrastructure. In fact, they're spending $2 trillion on infrastructure in Africa. Right? $2 trillion. And they're building coal plants because they're trying to give those people energy. Of course, they want them to be dependent on China. Okay, I get that. But they're doing it, and they're doing it with coal. And this is not what we should be doing. So for the world, same kind of thing. 4 million new megawatts of wind, 1.4 million new megawatts of solar, nuclear, 2.2 million megawatts of new solar, 1.1 million of hydro. It will cost 65 trillion, of which 28 trillion is capital. And who is going to put up that capital? It's not going to be Bangladesh, right? It's going to be United States, European Union, or China. That's it. We're the only one with the bucks. Oh, already showed that. I just want to end with this. This is an interesting report that just came out by this geometallurgist. He's determined that copper is the rate-limiting step in all of this. So throughout human history, all of human history, we have only mined 700 million tons of copper, total. Now, if we do business as usual, in the next 20 years, we're going to need another 700 million tons of copper without changing anything. But if we want to go green, we're going to need 4.2 billion tons of copper. And we've played out all the good copper grade ores. They're gone. So now we're going deeper, the lousy grades that are only 2 or 3% instead of 20%. It takes more energy, takes more time, makes more waste. So this is not a trivial thing. And then, of course, we're going to have to electrify these fleets of humongous trucks. They are really humongous. These are big vehicles. So if you think of electrifying these kind of vehicles, that's another trick. The devils are in the detail. It's important how you do that. You just can't say, we're going to electrify everything. How do we achieve a low carbon future for Washington State? We already have, basically, with the lowest carbon footprint of any state. But yeah, so we're closing our last coal plant. That'll be gone. The new legislation in 2019, the CETA legislation, the Clean Energy Technology Act of 2019, got rid of gas after 2035. We can't have gas anymore. So those are gone by law. It's nice to legislate reality. Is that great? We really should outlaw tornadoes. That would be great. Supposed to get a laugh. Keep hydro about the same. Double nuclear with small modular reactors, and double or even triple renewables, but you have to have the backup for them. So right now, we are 92 trillion watt hours in the state of Washington, and we have almost no grid scale storage and only 17,000 electric vehicles. We're going to about 115 terawatt hours in 2035. We need 15 grid scale pumped hydro storage units to make that wind useful, and over 2.5 million electric vehicles needing an additional 7 terawatt hours in order to get rid of petroleum. And that's our biggest carbon footprint is petroleum, is gas and diesel. That's our biggest footprint in the state of Washington. This mix will cost the Washington state about $200 billion, of which $100 billion is capital. That's actually doable. Now this is over 13 or more years. So 20 billion a year, 10 billion in capital. That's tough, but it's going to cost the same to keep where we are now. You want to take a break? You want me to keep talking? What? Questions?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I know you're trying to be fair and balanced. It would be interesting to see what the amount of copper and cost would be if you just went straight nuclear.
Yeah, that would be the best thing to do. We should have been doing that since 1973. The oil embargo of 1973. I remember, because I had just started driving and I was paying 32 cents a gallon. And then overnight it went up to $1.14, and I was really pissed. But that was the oil embargo. And France decided, well, they're not going to be dependent on the rest of the world, so they started building 50 nuclear power plants, which they built in 15 years. Perfect. It's great. We started as well, and then 3 Mile Island, which was nothing. I mean, that was an industrial accident. It did absolutely nothing, but it freaked everyone out. And then Chernobyl, of course, which is a whole other story. I mean, the Soviets, Chernobyl was a weapons reactor. Did you know that? Yeah, it was. Yeah, no containment vessel. I mean, it's the Soviets. It's the Russians. It's the same thing. I mean, So. Oh yeah. They did a stupid test that that the scientists and engineers said do not do, and of course the party bosses said you will do this or you'll be in the gulag. So they did it, and it failed as we expected. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But we should have been building, the world should have been building at this build rate from 1973, we would not have a problem now. Okay? And so that's what we need to do. We're not going to do that.
So, call back to something you said earlier. There's all these dams in Washington, and you said some fraction are producing electricity, some fraction
Right.
aren't. Can you talk about why we can't make more of them producing electricity?
The public. Okay. So suddenly dams are a bad word and hydro is a bad word. It's like, what are you talking about? Hydro is why we're so clean. Well, hydro is why our electricity is 8 cents a kilowatt hour and not 17 cents a kilowatt hour like New York. So, it's like you can rag on some things all you want. I mean, I like to rag on coal. I mean, if you need an evil, coal's evil, okay. But it raised 2 billion people up out of abject poverty. Kind of hard to rag too much on that, okay. But from now on, we don't need it. We can do other things. But it's kind of a balance. And so, we should be electrifying all the dams we can do in the United States, period, as fast as you can do them. That's the easiest way to produce clean energy. Quickest, too. Okay, now. Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to hog the mic a little bit. I'm a member of CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but one of the major pieces of legislation that they're close enough now? Okay.
Yeah.
One of the major pieces of legislation that CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, is pushing for is carbon fee and dividend. And
Right.
so all of those fossil fuels that you're saying you want to reduce, and you're by hook or crook, you're trying to force people to do it. If you put the legislation in place that says, okay, we're going to start making all fossil producers, people that pull fossil fuels out of the ground, pay for that fossil fuel, and we're going to give that money back to all the citizens. All the economists agree that that's sort of a third generation of carbon pricing, and it's something that is shown to be effective. En-ROADS models and things
Right.
like that show it as to be the most effective way to start pushing down on those. The
Right.
issue of permitting, that's another thing that CCL is pushing for. That's a bill in Congress that got shelved. It's going to come back up. That's something that I think people should look into and try and support as well, because we're not going to get the nuclear plants or any other plants built properly, or in time, I should
Right,
say,
in time.
without permitting. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I agree. And yeah, I mean, that's how we got rid of, carbon fee and dividend kind of thing. That's how we got rid of acid rain, in the central U.S., because we just started taxing acidic, discharge. And of course, they got rid of it. So, I mean, if it's going to cost you money, you get rid of it. So subsidies and there's ways, there's market solutions, I guess, is the way to say that. There are market solutions for this. You just have to have the guts to do them. Right. Right. Now, I want to warn you. So my ends stuff here is warning you of what's coming after 2025. It's not going to be nice in Washington State, Pacific Northwest. Okay. Right now, we are facing a shortfall in the next couple of years of 7 gigawatts. That's a lot. I mean, that's 7 coal plants, basically. Okay. And by 2030, as much as 10 gigawatts. Now, for the purposes of our grid, this is what the Pacific Northwest grid is. Okay, it actually goes down into Utah, which is not what I consider the Pacific Northwest, but hey, it doesn't matter. So it includes, Washington, Idaho, Oregon, half of Montana, Wyoming, and Utah. Now, so we are facing some major shortfalls, and the same thing happened in California and in Texas. The exact same thing, and they've been suffering with blackouts and major deaths as a result of this. Now, I mentioned the CETA Act of 2019, so we have to be carbon neutral by 2030. Okay, fine. These are the coal plants in the Pacific Northwest that are closing. And this is the time scale which they're closing. We've closed half of them. We've closed half of the coal plants in the Pacific Northwest, which is pretty awesome. I mean, I was kind of surprised. And that totals about 6 gigawatts. Now, there's another 6 megawatts retiring in Utah. All right, so that's 12 gigawatts of coal is gone. What are we replacing it with? The plan was to replace it with natural gas. That was the plan. And it takes a decade to plan this kind of stuff. And then in 2019, the CETA Act wiped that out. So now we have no plan. We have no plan to replace this. We're simply going to lose it. And there's no plan to replace it. What do you think is going to happen? Well, if you talk to the Northwest Power Pool, which is what our legislatures talk to, they say, well, we have, for the last 40 years, Pacific Northwest has had less than a 5% risk of blackouts. We just don't have blackouts here because we have so much hydro and we can load follow so well with it. So we never have any problem. However, by 2025, that because of all these coal plant shuttings, we're going to raise that risk to 26%. So after 2025, Pacific Northwest will have a quarter of the time the risk of blackouts. Now this means you will have blackouts. It's just kind of when. Well, of course, when it's really hot or really cold, that's when you have blackouts, right? That's when you stress the grid. So this last summer, we almost had very, very close to blackouts. I'm sorry, 2021. Pacific Northwest came this close to having rolling blackouts because we had no snowpack in the spring. Now, this last summer got really hot, but we had no risk of blackouts because we had a huge snowpack in the spring. Okay, so we were good for this year. Now, yeah, it's a ERCOT. That's the same as with ERCOT. ERCOT, which is the Texas grid, they installed so much wind without sufficient backup that when they had this really cold spell, because the wind doesn't blow when it's really hot or really cold. That's what happens. It just doesn't blow. So when it got really cold, they did not have enough gas to back up the loss of that much wind, and they had rolling blackouts, and it killed about 200 people and caused about $3 billion worth of damage overnight. This is not, this is why we have reliable grids. We've always had reliable grids in the United States, but now we're disrupting that because we seem to be jumping off this cliff without any real plan to how we're going to adjust. By 2030, we will be ERCOT. Yeah. Now, again, back to these load graphs, which I've already explained. Did you get this? How hydro is what displaces when wind blows? Go ahead.
So, question: that 7 to 10 gigawatt loss.
Right.
What fraction of current Washington demand is that?
About 10%. Yeah, that's a lot. Because right now we're 90 terawatt hours. Oops, what am I doing here? Okay, so now this is even worse, because according to the recent E3 Northwest Resource Adequacy Study, which we do every other year, again, all the utilities and regional transmission operators all get together and say, do we have enough resources for the next 10 years? And usually that's been yes, but now it's not. So of our 7,100 megawatts of wind that we have here, you can only depend on 500 megawatts of that 7,100 at any one time. Now, when the wind's blowing great and the weather's wonderful, sure, we have all the power we need. That's not when we need it. When it's really hot or really cold, you can only depend on 7% of that. So the capacity factor isn't even 27% for wind. It's actually 7% when you need it. Because when you don't need it, who cares? And that's not when you want all this energy. So this latest, though, this is from July when we had that heat wave. Huge heat wave, right, started. Well, what happened was wind, which is the green line, it just went away, like it always does. It always goes away when it's really hot. It always goes away when it's really cold. So if you're going to replace reliable energy like coal plants with something like wind, you're going to be in deep crap, okay? Because you can't do that. You can't depend on this. Okay, when it's really cold and really hot, you better have energy or you're going to have people freezing and dying or burning. It's not nice. I mean, Texas and California have been experiencing this. Now, fortunately, they've been buying energy from other states. Well, we can't buy energy from other states because they're closing their coal plants even more than us because they have a lot more coal than we do. So we're all closing of the coal plants with nothing to replace it. Get ready. I guess buy diesel generators for your home. I don't know what to do.
Hi. I missed part of the talk, so you might have already mentioned this, but what about innovations in power transmission, like high voltage DC and stuff like that? Couldn't you have a grid that's based on wind and that where if wind's not blowing in one place, it's going to be blowing in other places?
Nah, we did that study. We had 3, Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. We averaged the entire thing, and there were times when wind wasn't blowing anywhere. Now, if you say, okay, maybe it's blowing in Maine, or maybe it's blowing someplace else, and yeah, okay, you can try that, but that's going to take a smart grid. And what is that going to cost? $1 trillion. Yeah. Yes, guys, it cost $3 trillion, but that's okay. So, I mean, again, yeah, we can do this. I mean, if we have enough fully electric vehicles, you can do that. Cool. Shanghai, if you go to Shanghai, they have enough fully electric vehicles. When you come home and you park your electric vehicle in your garage and you plug it in, you have to type in when you want that car charged, when you need it charged. And everyone does that, and the grid actually uses, 100,000 EVs as a battery, as long as your car is charged when you need it. And it's really brilliant, but that takes a smart grid. We don't have that. Okay, how long is that going to take? Okay, well, 10, 20 years, I don't know. So again, there are innovative things you can do, but we're not doing them, and we're not doing them fast enough. Right? But, all right, let's get to that. Oops. Okay, so this is where this is where grid scale storage counts. If you want to make wind useful, if you want to make our wind useful in the Pacific Northwest, you better build several pumped hydro storage, or it's going to continue to be useless to us when we need it. Okay. Want to talk about costs? Everyone worries about costs. It's not the issue you think it is at all. Okay. In fact, when we talk about costs, think about this. Are costs sufficiently different between the sources to justify unethical decisions? All right? Now, if it's just going to cost a penny more kilowatt hour, I mean, come on. You're not going to pay a penny more kilowatt hour to save the world? Really? That's a penny too far? Okay, so, you need to think. It has to be way more expensive or way less expensive in order to justify it on cost. Because we're not supposed to be deciding these things merely on cost, or else we'd be a natural gas nation, period, 100%, right? So, energy has never been cheaper than it is today. In all of human history, it's never been cheaper than it is today. And as a result, food has never been cheaper than it is today, because it's tied to energy. Now, of course, it really got a lot cheaper, as a function of GDP, after 1850, when coal came on board. And you can see the 1973 oil embargo peak there. It's kind of interesting. Okay, this is from the Northwest Integrated Resource Plan that our legislature uses to make decisions about this kind of stuff. This is the latest one. So this is called LCOE, Levelized Cost of Energy, and I hate LCOE because it does not include the indirect costs, and it includes stupid things like loan depreciation. That's an arbitrary thing, okay, but whatever. So you can see right away, though, that those four middle ones, they're all within a penny of the average, all right? So again, is it really that important to squeeze another penny out of everyone? I mean, it's America, you're going to make a buck, I get that. But, you don't have to, fleece everyone, every penny that they own. So you shouldn't be making this decision on cost. Otherwise, you just go with natural gas, right? Of course, you just go with natural gas. But we're not. We're supposed to be making decisions based on other things like the planet, our survival, things like that. Now, coal and hydro actually is more costly. However, this is just direct costs. There's a bunch of, using this cost estimate then, what are these going to cost? What's the Green New Deal going to cost? All right, in the United States, the present mix of fossil fuel, the present mix that we have now, between now and 2050 is going to cost about $9 trillion, like I mentioned, and 1.7 is capital. So this is business as usual, right? Now, but to produce this 100% renewable nuclear hydro mix, this non-fossil fuel mix, but includes everything else, will cost about $9 trillion. But $4 trillion is capital investment, all right? Now, getting rid of fossil fuel will save the healthcare costs of America about $4 trillion, right? Because coal is a huge upper respiratory effect, same in oil and things like that. So again, we actually the Canadians did a really nice study about this. So just the cost savings alone on the healthcare system will more than pay for the capital. All right? This is actually worthwhile. But again, you don't get these benefits for a while. Now, if you do a renewable-only mix like Stanford talks about, which is really stupid, it's going to cost you $20 trillion, okay? And, 16 trillion is capital. Well, we're not going to do that. I mean, there's no way we're going to do that. It just costs too much. And, again, you'd still get the healthcare savings, but it would not be enough to offset the increased cost. For the world, we're talking about 65 trillion and 28 trillion in capital. Now, that being said, LCOE does not include indirect costs. And a lot of those indirect costs are integration into the grid. I mean, there's something called a congestion fee. Did you know that? When electricity comes onto the grid, if it's too congested, if you're trying to put more energy on it, you get charged for that. It's a congestion fee, nothing to do with anything. It's kind of bizarre. So, and if you're wind farms, then you have to have backup something. And in California, in Texas, and many other places, they use natural gas to back it up. You have to have those natural gas plants idling all day long, ready to jump. And that costs money. Not included in LCOE, but it's included in the ratepayers' fee. So if you take all this together, the cheapest energy is, and I apologize for not having existing hydro on it. Existing nuclear and existing hydro is the cheapest energy there is, period. You've already constructed them, you already built them, that's the major part of the cost. And now you're just letting it run for decades. New gas is 5.9 cents. Net zero gas, you hear that, that's not gonna happen, but okay, it'll increase the cost a little bit, but it's not going to happen. 6.9 cents for new nuclear. So it's more expensive to build a new plant, of course, and operate it. For wind and solar, it's actually significantly more expensive because you have to pay for this backup, and you have to pay for integration onto the grid. You have to pay for more high voltage transmission lines. And you got to remember, taxpayer subsidies do not change the cost. They change the price, but they don't change the cost. It just shifts the cost from the ratepayer to the taxpayer. And when that happens, you have no idea what the hell your taxes are going for anyway. So you're lost. Okay, you think it's cheap, but it's not. We're paying for it in our taxes. We're paying for it one way or another. Okay. And then there's the other cost, the other indirect costs, and I'm going to end with the next few slides. But you got to see these. They're funny. Well, death being funny, I guess. But we don't know how to capture these indirect costs. We don't know what is the cost of the carbon footprint. Okay, well, let's put a carbon tax of $15 a ton of CO2 emitted. Let's just throw that out there. And again, I've shown what that will do to the price of each of those. So of course, fossil fuels are all about carbon, so they go up a bit. So the carbon footprint here, 4 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, yeah, fossil fuel has very large carbon footprint. Of course, you'd think so. It's not zero with the others, but it's significantly lower. And hydro, most of that CO2 comes from cement and also the methane emissions from the back pools behind the dams. Solar, it's organic solvents, huge amount of organic solvents needed to make solar. Wind and nuclear, it's simply mining and construction. So again, cement, mining for iron, things like that. And then area, now we don't know what to assign a cost of a square mile, taking a pristine square mile and doing something with it, like building wind turbines on it or a nuclear plant or something. But the Europeans came up with 100 acres, just picked it out of the air. I guess I don't know how they came up with that, but we can assign that too. And again, for fossil fuels, not much area needed, and this includes drilling and everything else. For the renewables, yeah, now you're getting into significant physical footprint, and of course nuclear is neither. So Then there's the death print, okay? And no one ever talks about the death print. So now coal kills so many people, you gotta push that aside because it just blocks everything. So coal is the killer, really. If you need an evil, it's evil, but whatever. Natural gas still kills a lot of people, not that many. Hydro, now these are global numbers. Hydro kills people because of dam failures, not in the US, but elsewhere. Then solar, wind, and nuclear, this is simply accidents. Falling off, rooftops, falling off wind turbines, falling off scaffolding at a nuclear plant while you're painting. It's, nothing to do with the actual source of the energy, simply industrial accidents. And nuclear is even safer than all the others because you're always very careful at a nuclear power plant. Everyone's afraid of everything all the time, so everything is done correctly. So here's the numbers, the mortality rate, the death print. Deaths per trillion kilowatt hours, you have to normalize it. Now coal, wow, yeah, of course, it kills a lot of people. People a year die from coal. Now China's getting better. A few years ago, that was 250,000 per terawatt hour, but they're cleaning up their act, okay. United States, only 10,000. That should get a snigger because 10,000 is not acceptable, but okay. At least it's not 100,000. Then natural gas, biomass. The World Health Organization recently determined that biomass was an epidemic in the third world, deaths from biomass, because of poor ventilation. We're not, Wind and solar, again, these are just simply accidents. Nuclear, and that 40 for the global average includes worst case numbers for Chernobyl, which were not as bad as you think, but we'll just throw in a bunch more deaths just to be nice. And what you see, though, there are three categories, coal, hydro, and nuclear, that I have a global average and a U.S. average. Why is the U.S. average so much lower? Why do we kill so few people compared to everyone else? Regulation. Yep. So the reason coal doesn't kill so many people in the United States is because of the Clean Air Act. Arguably, the single piece of legislation that saved the most lives in the history of humanity is the Clean Air Act. Now, I've been given some grief there because the 1934 Fair Labor Act, which got rid of child labor and gave us the weekend, gave us the 5-day work week, that saved a lot of people too. But I still maintain the Clean Air Act is the one that saved the most. Now, hydro. What? Yes, we are close. I've gotten to the death. The deaths are what's important, right? So the hydro kills so few people because of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They inspect dams and they will shut you down. Okay. Now, in 1976, the Bankyo Dam failure killed 170,000 Chinese. I mean, that's a big deal. Doesn't happen here. And then nuclear, of course, NRC. NRC is the single most strict regulatory body in the world on anything. They will shut nuclear plants down for using the wrong color ink. I'm not kidding. They will do. You're supposed to use black ink, not blue. Not blue, black. Okay. Now here's Beijing today. Now they found out that people get a little wacko when they can't see the sun for a while, so they put up a bunch of flat screen TVs. I mean, give me a break. Not my choice. Oh, we gotta stop. Okay. I was gonna say, what kills you? What kills people in America? What's iatrogenic? Medicine gone wrong. Okay. So nuclear, hey, one guy fell off, I think it was a Browns Ferry, broke his neck, fell off a scaffolding. Okay, great, wonderful. But why are we still killing 25,000 people with hamburgers? I mean, come on, this is absurd. So why are you so afraid of nuclear? Someone gave me grief recently, a biostatistician. Oh, I can't stop. Because, turn me off. Yes.
Someone died at 3 Mile Island 1. He was hit by a truck.
Yeah, he was hit by a truck. And of course, Fukushima, 3 guys died, but they were swept out to sea by the tsunami, so it had nothing to do with Fukushima. No one's died from Fukushima, no one ever will. There wasn't enough dose to anyone. Okay, so, yeah, It's nice to know that eating is only slightly more dangerous than nuclear power now. That's great. Questions?
What time is it?
It's 8:30.
Okay. So we just first want to say thanks to everybody who came out. I guess the weather's behaving a little bit, we'll hope. But Friends of Fission Northwest thanks all of you for showing up. And Jim was great, right? So we do have a sign-up sheet that actually is being held up right now that I only send out emails about events. I don't have time to send out lots of stuff to bother your inbox. So if you haven't signed up, consider. And it's 8:30 now, so maybe we can take one more question. Somebody have a hot question?
No pun intended.
You've done a great talk today.
Thanks.
But it's kind of a bleak future, because I think a lot of us know deep down that those curves you showed earlier about 2012, 2020, 2025, we're not going to beat any of them going forward.
Right.
Do you think that maybe nuclear can have a role in climate mitigation
Yes.
in the future, as opposed to avoiding an outcome, maybe making the outcome not so bad?
Indeed. Absolutely. And you need to come back. You need to get me back to talk about Plan B. Do we have a Plan B? Yes, we do. You're not going to like it, but we got a Plan B. Great. It's called solar geoengineering. It's good stuff. Good crowd. Thank you. Yeah.